What's the right soybean harvest moisture? Well, just about every farmer out there knows that we're shooting for 13%. But how big a deal is it if you're right at 13% or if the beans are a little too wet or a little too dry? That's what we want to talk about today.
There's so many things to talk about here and not enough time to get to all of them, but what I'm looking at with soybean harvest is being out there timely, being ready to go. You can't wait until the last minute getting a soybean combine ready for number one. Number two, you have to have the bin space all ready, the trucks all ready, everything. You cannot slow up at all during soybean harvest. And that moisture percentage is going to change during the day. So getting going as soon in the day as you can before you start losing that moisture is a really big deal. This year, one of the things that we're extremely concerned about is pod and stem blight. We're seeing some pod and stem blight show up in different areas of the country. And when that happens, or when almost any disease really impacts your soybeans, they're going to drop moisture so fast once they're ready for harvest. So you just have to be ready to go.
All right, in terms of that moisture drop, what I often run into on our own farm is our guys will say, well, I don't know, the beans aren't quite fit yet this morning. It's a little tough, so we'll just wait a while. And the problem is by the time they're out in the field, the beans are 11% and we've already lost all kinds of money. So I'm just trying to say, and this is the thing I tell our people too, hey, we're going to be out in the field when the beans are 15, okay? Because quite often in our geography at least, we go from 15 to 14 in an hour, we go from 14 to 13 in another hour, and now we're less than ideal moisture once we drop below that 13. But let's talk specifically about how big a deal really is this. I just want to give you a real quick example. 13% moisture beans versus 8% moisture beans. That's a 5% moisture gap, right? But what we figure is 1.5% shrink per point of moisture. So you take 5 times 1.5, that's 7.5%. Let's say we had 50 bushel soybeans. In effect then, 7.5% of 50 bushels, that's 3.75 bushels. If you have $10 soybeans, that's $37.50 an acre. $37.50 an acre. Okay, so what would you rather do? Take a tiny little dock for bringing in 13.5 or 14 or 14.5% moisture beans, or give up $37.50 an acre? But this is one of these things, I call it the hidden yield loss. Hidden profit loss, because nobody ever notices. For example, your wife's not going to give you a hard time if you have this big check that you got from the grain elevator, right? But your wife might give you a hard time if she looks at the settlement sheet and it says, oh, you got a dock. You brought in beans that were too wet. Okay, so I'm just trying to say you're all set up to bring in dry beans, and that's kind of the way the whole system works, because nobody will tell you, oh, your beans are too dry. The elevator just takes them, no big deal, you get your money, that's just the way it goes. You just lost all those bushels, they said goodbye. So what I'm trying to tell you here is take the little dock. You're way ahead to do that as opposed to give up all that yield.
The last point I'll make is it comes back to your planning going into next spring and going into this spring. What are you going to do for varieties? There's so many farmers that I talk to across the country that plant one variety of soybeans on the whole farm, and then they try to put it all in 2 or 3 days like my brother does. You know what? That's nice. The problem is all those beans are going to mature at about exactly the same time, and you aren't going to be able to get through all those fields and get ideal moisture. What you really need to do is spread out your maturities just a little bit, plant more varieties of soybeans. That way you can kind of step your way into that harvest and at least have a few extra days of ideal moisture percentage in some of those fields.
We just encourage you, before you get going hard this harvest season, really think about what moisture do I want to be at, and make sure you're as timely as possible. And this may mean you have to harvest parts of fields early. This may mean splitting fields, whatever. I don't care. All we're trying to do is help you put more dollars on your bottom line, and don't be afraid to take that little dock for beans that are slightly wet, as opposed to having those beans drop down to 8, 9, 10% moisture.
Well, you may not have noticed that hidden profit loss Brian was talking about, but if our Weed of the Week's in the area, you will certainly see it. We'll show you how to stop it coming up next.